that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. At the end of the day...
Okay, let's just dive right in, because what we just heard from Stephen Miller, wow.
Yeah.
That's genuinely appalling stuff.
It really is. It throws up some incredibly serious questions about, where things are headed legally, politically.
Absolutely. Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive Report Show. That clip was, of course, Stephen Miller, Trump official, the guy behind many of those really controversial immigration policies. He held a press conference recently, and we've got the transcript. We're going to really unpack it here.
Yeah.
Our mission today, essentially, is to dissect what he actually said, figure out the main ideas he's pushing, and talk about the potential impact. Because, frankly, it touches on some core constitutional principles and how our legal system is supposed to work.
And the consistent theme, the thread running through almost everything he said, it's this direct challenge to the institutions that are supposed to keep executive power in check. It's quite blatant.
No kidding. Let's start with maybe the most shocking bit, this idea of suspending habeas corpus. He actually said it's something they're actively looking at for undocumented immigrants because, in his words, we're in a time of invasion.
Right.
Now, habeas corpus, for anyone needing a quick reminder, that's like the bedrock legal right. It stops the government from just locking you up indefinitely without showing a valid reason to a judge.
Exactly. It's fundamental. It protects against arbitrary detention, unlawful imprisonment. It goes way, way back in legal history. So even suggesting suspending it, especially for one specific group, that's a massive step. It echoes some pretty dark historical moments like debates during the Civil War, though even then its suspension was limited and hugely controversial.
My gut reaction is just visceral opposition. This isn't some abstract legal theory game. This is about basic human rights, stopping the government from having absolute power over people's liberty, and then tacking on that word invasion to describe people immigrating.
Yeah, that language.
It's so loaded, so dehumanizing.
It's absolutely calculated. Using terms like invasion creates this atmosphere of crisis, right?
Yeah.
And once you have a crisis, you can try to justify extreme actions that people would normally find completely unacceptable. It's a classic rhetorical move, unfortunately, and often precedes rollbacks on civil liberties.
It's just a really dangerous game he's playing. And speaking of dangerous, his attacks on the judiciary, outright saying the courts are at war with the president and Congress, calling judges radical rogue judges with a Marxist agenda just because they don't automatically approve whatever the administration wants.
That kind of language is incredibly damaging to the idea of an independent judiciary. The courts aren't supposed to be a rubber stamp. Their job is to interpret the law, make sure government actions line up with the Constitution. Disagreement isn't war. It's how the system of checks and balances is supposed to function. It prevents any one branch from getting too powerful.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the whole point. And he went after the courts specifically on temporary protected status, TPS. He claimed Congress actually took away the court's power to review those decisions. Let's just play that bit again so you can hear directly.
Even allowed to be involved in immigration cases. Many of you probably don't know this. I'll give you a good example. Are you familiar with the term temporary protected status, or TPS, right? So, by statute, the courts are stripped of jurisdiction from overruling a presidential determination or a secretarial determination on TPS when the Secretary of Homeland Security makes that determination. So when Secretary Noem terminated TPS for the illegals that Biden flew into the country, when courts stepped in, they were violating explicit language that Congress had enacted, saying they have no jurisdiction.
Okay, so it's crucial to understand this. Yes, Congress can define court jurisdiction to some extent.
Right.
But the idea that the executive can just act with zero judicial review, especially when you're talking about things affecting people's lives or established legal processes, well, that's a very, very debatable legal take. Courts generally hold on to the power to see if executive actions are actually legal and constitutional.
Right. And then he claimed courts act lawlessly by blocking rules requiring citizenship proof for voting, even though, yes, there's a law against non-citizens voting. It feels like such a distortion.
Well, yeah. Just because there's a law against something doesn't mean the government gets a blank check to enforce it in any way it wants, especially if those methods might block eligible citizens from voting. That's exactly when courts step in to make sure the enforcement methods themselves are constitutional and don't create undue burdens on voting rights. It's checks and balances working like they should.
It all comes back to separation of powers, doesn't it? The judiciary isn't supposed to be a wing of the White House. It's independent oversight. Miller's attacks are a direct hit on that balance. Okay, shifting gears a bit. He also bragged about a massive increase in worksite enforcement. You know, raiding businesses looking for undocumented workers.
That signals a big push on interior immigration enforcement. And that kind of escalation, well, it has potentially huge effects on the businesses, obviously, but also profoundly on the workers, their families, the whole communities they're part of.
It's funny, isn't it? That kind of heavy-handed government intervention. Yeah. How does that square with the whole small government conservatism idea they often talk about? Seems like a contradiction.
That's a really sharp point. Very often, these kinds of policies seem driven less by a consistent ideology, like small government, and more by specific political goals or targeting certain groups, you know?
Yeah, seems like it. Then there was the bizarre justification for firing Democratic members of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the CPSC. He said the president just wants employees who are the best, the brightest, the most committed to fulfilling the agenda.
Right. Now, look, presidents appoint and remove political officials. That's true. But using that rationale for an agency like the CPSC, it definitely raises concerns. Are they politicizing an agency that's supposed to be about public safety, not just pushing an agenda? If the message is agree with the agenda or you're out, that could seriously weaken consumer protection. You need diverse viewpoints there.
It definitely makes you wonder if safety takes a backseat to politics. Okay, and then, predictably, the 2020 election came up, along with this completely off-the-wall question about an assassination. Miller just sort of vaguely lumped it all together, saying the DOJ is working on all three of the things, whatever that means.
That kind of vague, dismissive response, especially when you mix serious things with, frankly, conspiracy theories, it just fuels misinformation. There's no clarity, just muddying the waters between real issues and completely baseless stuff. It's deeply unhelpful.
And he was proud of Trump's executive order on election integrity, the citizenship verification thing. Then he blamed a judge for blocking it and, surprise, surprise, threw in the Marxist agenda line again.
Like we talked about, the issue isn't stopping non-citizens from voting that's illegal already. The real legal fight is about making sure whatever verification rules they try to impose don't end up unfairly stopping eligible citizens from casting their ballot. That's the constitutional tightrope. Exactly. It just feels more and more like it's about making it harder for certain people to vote, not solving some made-up crisis of non-citizen voting. Okay, moving on. Miller also talked about Tom Homan's colorful language, about NYC Mayor Eric Adams and cooperating with ICE, and his response had a real threat behind it, suggesting appropriate legal consequences for local officials who don't fully jump on board with federal immigration demands. That brings up big questions about federalism, you know? State and local governments usually have some autonomy in setting their own law enforcement priorities. This sounds like federal strong-arming.
And then he dropped the bombshell, claiming they've achieved the mission of sealing the border, which, let's be real, doesn't match reality, and saying the focus is now shifting to a mass deportation program with exponentially larger numbers being arrested and removed. We have to play that clip again. The language is just stark.
Engaging in obstructionist behavior. But I would also say that when it comes to immigration enforcement, now that we have achieved the mission of sealing the border, you're going to see more and more resources and priorities put into the mass deportation program. And so on a day-to-day basis, you're going to see exponentially larger numbers of illegal aliens being arrested and removed from the interior.
Mass deportation program. That phrase itself just hangs in the air. It immediately brings up historical parallels, ethical nightmares, huge practical questions. Trying to actually do something on that scale, the human cost would be absolutely devastating. It's chilling. Just utterly chilling. And the way he casually mentions sending planes to every country in the world, including places like Iraq, Yemen, Haiti, it just highlights the sheer terrifying scale of what he's proposing. The potential for just immense human suffering.
Logistically, diplomatically, an operation like that would be almost impossible to pull off, not to even mention the humanitarian crisis it would trigger, both of the people deported and the countries forced to receive them. Then he switched to trade, making these huge claims about historic trade deals from Trump's tariffs and then blaming NAFTA for, like, everything bad. Factories closing, fentanyl addiction, families breaking up. Let's hear that one too.
Also just note that if you look at the statistics, about 90,000 factories in the United States closed since NAFTA was signed, which is, I mean, almost unimaginable figure. The media never cared about those workers and their factories who were destroyed. And we can all visit the towns now, and we know, of course, the heartbreaking stories, the fentanyl addiction, the breakup of traditional families, the disintegration of whole communities. That was the catastrophe that occurred that President Trump is reversing by finally standing up for the American worker.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a massive oversimplification, isn't it? Blaming incredibly complex social problems, factory closures driven by globalization and automation, the opioid crisis, shifts in family structure, blaming all that on one trade deal. Economics and society are way more complicated than that. Technology, global competition, policy choices over decades, lots of factors are involved. Pinning it all on NAFTA is just misleading. It feels like finding a convenient scapegoat, right? Ignore all the messy details of global economics and social change, just point fingers at NAFTA. And finally, we get to his really, really troubling comments on refugees in South Africa, saying white farmers there are the textbook definition of refugees, while at the same time trashing the entire refugee program for everyone else, linking them to poverty and crime.
That rhetoric is deeply disturbing. It's applying this incredibly biased, discriminatory filter to who deserves refugee status and who doesn't, suggesting one specific group fits the definition perfectly while basically smearing other vulnerable populations. It's not just factually questionable, it's morally repugnant. It really smacks of a dangerous double standard, plain and simple.
It absolutely reeks of racism, frankly.
Well,
Just thinly veiled bigotry. And then the grand finale. His comments on a court ruling about foreigners supporting terrorist groups. He called it a judicial coup by a handful of Marxist judges and an attack on democracy. Let's get that last soundbite in.
What it really comes down to is this. The American people voted for President Trump in large part to seal the border, deport the illegals, fix our immigration system so it serves America's interests, and remove the people from this country that we don't want here because they threaten our national security, our public safety, or our economic security. That is what he was elected to do. It's what the Constitution empowers him to do. And this judicial coup by a handful of Marxist judges to frustrate that effort can only be understood as an attack on democracy. Thank you.
Calling a court ruling you don't like a judicial coup, accusing judges of Marxism, that shows either a fundamental misunderstanding of how democracy works or, perhaps more likely, a deliberate attempt to twist it. Legal challenges, court rulings, even dissenting opinions, and those aren't attacks on democracy. They're essential parts of it. They're safeguards.
It's just outrageous, truly outrageous rhetoric. When you hear someone who held a top government position talk so casually about suspending basic rights, attacking independent judges with baseless smears, pushing these discriminatory ideas, it's genuinely alarming for anyone who actually cares about the Constitution and democratic norms.
It really is. These statements paint a very stark, very troubling picture of a worldview where it seems unchecked executive power matters more than the rule of law, more than established legal processes, more than fundamental rights.
Exactly, and it really forces you, the listener, to think. When people who've been in power openly talk about things like suspending habeas corpus, when they call independent judges enemies, what does that really signal about their bigger goals, about the kind of country they actually envision? It's a heavy question, but one we absolutely need to grapple with. And that's probably all the time we have for this deep dive.
It certainly leaves you with a lot to process.
it really does. And for you listening, please keep thinking about these critical issues. We want to hear your thoughts too. Leave your comments below. And hey, if you found this valuable, please like and subscribe to the Deep Dive Report Show. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next analysis when news breaks. We'll catch you next time.